Level 1. The Veterinary Student. You are 18 years old, and you begin veterinary school with a childhood love of animals that everyone warns you won't survive the coursework intact. Your first anatomy class involves memorizing the skeletal structure of 6 completely different species within the same semester, and you fail your first practical exam badly. You practice suturing on fake skin pads late into the night, hands clumsy at first, gradually steadier with repetition. Your roommate, a fellow student named Okafor, studies beside you most nights, both of you quizzing each other on drug dosages until neither makes sense anymore. Your clinical rotations begin in your third year, and your first real patient is a nervous golden retriever whose owner watches you with visible skepticism. An instructor named Voss watches you struggle to place an IV catheter on the dog's thin vein. Voss doesn't take over. She talks you through it quietly, adjusting your angle slightly. And the catheter finally slides in cleanly. The owner exhales audibly, relief plain on her face, and something in you settles too. You spend your first shift shadowing at a busy animal hospital, overwhelmed by the sheer range of species passing through in a single afternoon. A critical emergency comes in during your second week, a dog hit by a car, and you watch a full team move with practiced urgency. If you think you could handle making impossible decisions for creatures who can't tell you where it hurts, say so honestly in the comments below, because most people genuinely can't. Okafor nearly drops out during a brutal exam period, exhausted and doubting himself completely, though he ultimately pushes through. You graduate veterinary school eventually, exhausted, carrying considerable debt, uncertain whether you're actually ready for what comes next. Your mother attends the ceremony, crying in a way that embarrasses you both slightly, though neither of you mentions it afterward. Your father, a farmer who works with large animals himself, tells you at graduation that he always knew this suited you. You never forget the specific smell of antiseptic mixed with animal dander from those first clinical rotation weeks. Voss tells you once, near the end of your rotation, that she remembers her own first terrified clinical shift vividly. You don't fully believe her at the time, unable to imagine her ever feeling as lost as you currently do. Your final exam before graduation includes a full simulated emergency scenario involving 3 different species simultaneously. You pass, exhausted, hands still slightly shaking as you walk out of the simulation lab afterward. Okafor sends you a message years later, thanking you for never once judging his own difficult struggles. Your first solo suture on a live patient still feels like the exact moment everything genuinely began. Level 2, the Veterinary Associate. You are 22 years old, hired as a junior associate at a general practice clinic, treating everything from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. Your supervising veterinarian, a woman named Delacroix, corrects your technique constantly during your first months. Though never unkindly, you make a diagnostic error during your third week, missing an early sign of kidney disease in an older cat, and Delacroix catches it during a follow-up visit before real harm occurs. She tells you afterward that missing something once and learning from it matters more than never missing anything at all. You start keeping detailed notes on every unusual case, building your own reference library of lessons learned firsthand. An elderly client named Petrosian brings in the same aging beagle every few months, and you grow genuinely fond of their easy, familiar rapport. The beagle passes away eventually from old age, peacefully, and Petrosian thanks you specifically for making his final years comfortable. You start noticing which cases genuinely interest you most, drawn increasingly towards surgery and complex diagnostic puzzles. Delacroix recommends you for additional surgical training this year, writing a recommendation letter without being asked. You apply and get accepted. Nervous excitement replacing the exhaustion that's defined most of this year completely. Delacroix throws you a small farewell gathering before your surgical training begins. Cheap cake and genuine well wishes from the entire clinic staff. You keep a photo from that afternoon taped inside your car visor for years afterward, a reminder of where you actually started. Petrosian's old beagle photograph still hangs somewhere in that clinic's waiting room, you'd guess, though you've never actually gone back to check. You call your mother most weeks during this year, though you rarely tell her the specific details of difficult cases. She asks anyway, patiently, and you give her small pieces you think she can handle hearing genuinely. Delacroix eventually retires from full-time practice, though she still covers occasional shifts when the clinic needs extra help. You visit her sometimes, grateful for a mentor who never stopped believing in your abilities. Petrosian's old beagle photograph still means something to you, decades after that final, peaceful appointment. Delacroix's patient corrections during those early months shaped your entire technique more than any textbook ever did. Level 3, the surgical resident. You are 24 years old, finally training specifically in veterinary surgery. The pace and precision required reorganizing your entire understanding of the profession. Voss, your old veterinary school instructor, turns out to run this exact surgical residency program, a continuity that feels oddly reassuring immediately. Your first solo surgery happens during your third week, a routine spay that becomes complicated by unexpected internal bleeding. You freeze for perhaps 2 full seconds before training overrides the freeze completely, hands moving with sudden, practiced certainty. Voss stands nearby throughout, ready to intervene but trusting you to handle it. And the surgery concludes successfully. You don't process what actually happened until you're alone in the scrub room 20 minutes later, hands still slightly unsteady. A young dog named Biscuit comes in one particular night after swallowing something toxic, and the emergency team works for nearly an hour trying to save him. He doesn't survive despite everyone's genuine effort. And you personally speak with his devastated young owner because someone has to. You don't have adequate words for a crying child, and you don't pretend to. Just staying present and honest with her. You keep Biscuit's name written in a small notebook you start keeping specifically for this purpose. A private ritual nobody else knows about. Voss finds you sitting alone afterward, saying little at first. Just present until your breathing steadies completely. A colleague named Reyes becomes your closest friend during this residency. The two of you developing an easy shorthand born from shared exhaustion and long surgical hours. You develop a habit of eating lunch standing up near the surgical suite, unable to fully sit still even during breaks. Reyes teaches you a specific breathing technique she uses between surgeries, something to reset before the next difficult case arrives. A veteran surgeon named Castellano takes a particular interest in your development, offering blunt but genuinely useful technical feedback regularly. Biscuit's owner writes you a letter months later, thanking you specifically for staying present during her worst moment. You use Reyes's breathing technique constantly during this first full year, though you never quite admit that to anyone directly. Castellano's bluntness, frustrating initially, becomes something you genuinely miss once he actually retires from the hospital. You keep Reyes's breathing technique long after she transfers away, teaching it eventually to residents of your own. Some of those difficult early lessons only make complete sense years later, in hindsight. Voss shakes your hand at graduation from the residency, a rare gesture from someone who rarely praises anyone directly. Biscuit's mother writes you a second letter years later, thanking you again for that specific difficult night. Level 4, the experienced veterinarian. You are 26 years old, considerably steadier now, though the steadiness feels earned through difficult repetition rather than natural talent. You mentor newer residents during their surgical rotations, remembering exactly how overwhelmed you once felt during your own first months. A resident named Marchetti joins the program, nervous and eager in a way that reminds you uncomfortably of yourself 2 years earlier. You develop a habit of checking on newer residents after particularly difficult surgeries, remembering that nobody consistently checked on you during your own early training. Reyes gets recruited to a specialty referral hospital this year, and though you're genuinely happy for her, the residency program feels different without her steady presence. A particularly complex emergency surgery tests your composure completely. A dog with multiple internal injuries requiring urgent, precise intervention. You perform the surgery successfully, though the adrenaline afterward leaves you oddly hollow rather than triumphant. You visit the animal shelter occasionally on your days off, volunteering time you don't entirely have to spare. Marchetti asks you once how you manage carrying memories of the animals you couldn't save. And you're honest with her, admitting you're still genuinely figuring that out yourself. Castellano retires this year after nearly 3 decades in veterinary surgery, and his going away speech focuses entirely on the newer residents rather than himself. You realize slowly that this specific selflessness is exactly what you're starting to become yourself. Your own apartment starts filling with small mementos from grateful clients over the years. Cards and notes you can't bring yourself to throw away. Marchetti asks you constantly about pursuing further surgical certifications, and you help her map out a realistic timeline. You start noticing your own reflection in Marchetti sometimes, the same hunger you once carried, now visible clearly in her. You realize gradually that Voss's trust took years to earn, built entirely through consistent, quiet reliability over time. Your locker fills gradually with small items from grateful clients, a collection you never intended to start. Your own apartment feels increasingly like a quiet museum of grateful clients, each item holding its own story. Reyes calls occasionally from her new specialty hospital, and you two still compare notes across different institutions entirely. Level 5. The Senior Veterinarian. You are 28 years old, and Voss asks you directly this year whether you'd consider becoming a residency instructor yourself, training the program's newest surgical residents formally. You say yes, remembering everything Voss once did for you, hoping you can offer something genuinely comparable. Marchetti, now considerably more capable, gets assigned to you specifically for her final residency rotation. You develop your own teaching approach, less clinical than Voss's, more focused on the emotional weight nobody adequately prepares new veterinarians for. A particularly demanding week tests your composure completely. Back-to-back emergency surgeries leaving you running on minimal sleep. You coordinate seamlessly with your surgical team regardless. Years of accumulated instinct finally converging into something resembling genuine mastery. Your reputation within the veterinary community grows steadily. Other clinics specifically requesting your consultation during difficult surgical cases. You start dating someone new this year, a wildlife rehabilitation specialist named Ashworth you meet through a shared professional conference. For once, a relationship survives your unpredictable schedule instead of ending because of it. Mostly because Ashworth understands demanding, animal-centered work intimately herself. You attend a national veterinary surgery conference this year, your first time presenting alongside colleagues from other hospitals entirely. Ashworth attends your presentation, sitting quietly in the audience with visible pride throughout. The conference badge from that first presentation still sits in a drawer somewhere, slightly creased and genuinely treasured. Your paramedic partner, Ashworth, attends your award ceremony that year, sitting quietly in the audience with visible pride. Voss sits beside her, the two of them chatting easily despite having just met that same evening entirely. That conference taught you your hospital's challenges weren't unique, a strange comfort you carried home afterward. Ashworth learns your specific surgical schedule better than you sometimes remember it yourself, adjusting her own life around it. The conference badge from that first presentation still sits in a drawer, slightly creased and genuinely treasured always. Your reputation within the surgical community continues growing steadily. Quiet competence speaking louder than any self-promotion ever could. Level 6. The head surgeon. You are 30 years old, promoted to head surgeon at the hospital, responsible for surgical standards and outcomes across the entire department now. You learn to see the surgical department as a coordinated system, tracking case complexity, staffing needs, and outcomes simultaneously. A particularly difficult case forces you to make a genuinely hard decision, recommending against an expensive surgery with poor survival odds despite the owner's desperate hope. The conversation devastates the owner, though you know honestly it's the compassionate recommendation given the animal's actual prognosis. Marchetti gets promoted to senior resident this year, and you write her recommendation, remembering exactly how meaningful yours once felt to you. You mentor incoming surgical residents now too, teaching them the specific emotional calculus this specialty demands constantly. A hospital administrator questions your surgical costs during a difficult budget meeting, and you advocate directly for the equipment and staffing your department genuinely needs. You develop occasional insomnia during particularly demanding stretches, lying awake, replaying difficult cases from surgeries hours earlier. Ashworth learns to recognize these nights, sitting with you quietly rather than offering advice you haven't specifically asked for. You develop a specific ritual before every surgical day now. 5 quiet minutes alone in your car before walking through the hospital doors. This small habit helps you transition mentally between your personal life and the intensity waiting inside. A particularly difficult case involving a young dog reminds you painfully of Biscuit, though this dog survives against genuinely difficult odds. You allow yourself to feel real relief this time. Understanding it doesn't diminish what happened to Biscuit years earlier. Your car ritual continues for the remainder of your career. 5 minutes that somehow make everything else manageable. You develop genuine patience for administrative meetings you once found tedious, understanding now how decisions there affect actual patients directly. Some nights the insomnia still visits, though Ashworth's quiet presence beside you makes it considerably more bearable now. Your predecessor calls occasionally that first year, offering quiet advice nobody else feels comfortable giving you directly. You realize eventually that leading surgical response taught you more about genuine calm than any other experience possibly could. Level 7, the specialist surgeon. You are 32 years old, selected to lead the hospital's most complex referral cases specifically. The most demanding surgeries routed directly through you now. You coordinate with specialists across multiple disciplines simultaneously during complicated cases, your role expanding beyond hands-on surgery toward broader case orchestration. A particularly devastating multi-animal emergency brings several critically injured animals through your doors within the same hour. A house fire rescue. You direct the response calmly, decades of accumulated training finally converging into instinctive, coordinated leadership throughout the chaos. Most of the animals survive that night, a result your hospital director calls remarkable, though you deflect credit toward your entire surgical team specifically. Voss retires this year, and you speak at her retirement gathering, struggling to adequately capture everything she taught you across your entire career. She tells you privately afterward that watching you lead reminds her exactly why she became an instructor originally. Marchetti, now a senior surgeon herself, brings you coffee before particularly demanding surgical days, a small ritual neither of you ever formally discusses. You start writing brief notes to grieving owners after particularly difficult cases, something entirely optional that you began doing years earlier and never stopped. Several owners write back over the years, and you keep every single response in a drawer at home. Marchetti asks you once why you still write these extra, unpaid personal notes to grieving owners consistently. You tell her honestly that it helps you personally, beyond whatever comfort it might offer the owners themselves. Some of those owner letters arrive years after the fact. Grief processed slowly into eventual gratitude and closure. Voss's old surgical badge stays clipped inside your locker for years, a small reminder during difficult shifts. Some family letters arrive years after the fact. Grief processed slowly into eventual gratitude and closure completely. Marchetti's coffee ritual continues for years. A small kindness that somehow makes every difficult morning slightly more bearable. Level 8, the Veterinary Educator. You are 34 years old, moving partially away from daily surgery to train the hospital's newest surgical residents formally, teaching the exact skills Voss once taught you. You develop training curricula incorporating everything you've learned across 16 years of veterinary medicine and surgery. A resident panics during a particularly difficult simulated surgical scenario, and you recognize your own past fear reflected completely within her. You talk her through it patiently, the same way Voss once talked you through your own frozen moment years earlier. Marchetti sends you a message thanking you for lessons that shaped her entire surgical approach and teaching philosophy. You feel a specific, quiet pride reading it, understanding exactly what mentorship actually accomplishes across generations of practitioners. You write a training manual chapter specifically about processing patient loss in veterinary medicine, something no one taught you formally when you needed it most. A young veterinarian thanks you years later, saying that chapter helped her stay in this profession during a moment she nearly quit entirely. You visit veterinary schools occasionally now, speaking to students exactly as uncertain as you once were at their exact age. A young student asks you directly whether the profession is worth its considerable emotional cost, and you answer honestly, telling her it depends entirely on what she needs the work to give back to her personally. Voss attends one of these talks unexpectedly, standing quietly at the back of the room the entire time. That veterinary student who asked about cost eventually joins your own hospital, citing your honest answer specifically. Your training manual gets adopted eventually by veterinary schools outside your own state, a reach you never anticipated. Teaching, you discover, requires an entirely different kind of courage than direct surgery ever demanded of you. A documentary crew visits your teaching hospital eventually, filming training sequences that later inspire several students to enroll. Your own teaching philosophy solidifies slowly, built entirely from years of accumulated, hard-won surgical and emotional experience. Level 9, the Hospital Director. You are 36 years old, promoted to Hospital Director, overseeing the entire veterinary hospital's operations, staffing, and clinical standards now. Administrative responsibilities dominate your days, though you still perform occasional surgeries. Refusing to lose direct contact with actual patient care entirely, you advocate fiercely for accessible veterinary care programs, fighting for reduced cost options that rarely make headlines but genuinely help struggling pet owners. A significant policy change regarding emergency surgical protocols bears your direct influence this year, incorporating lessons from your own accumulated surgical experience. You mentor rising veterinary leaders throughout the hospital, recognizing the same dedication you once carried yourself as a much younger practitioner. You keep Biscuit's name written inside your desk drawer still, a private reminder that never fully leaves your memory, regardless of years past. Marchetti gets selected for her own hospital director position elsewhere, and the call announcing it leaves you quietly emotional afterward. You establish a low-cost surgical clinic day once monthly, treating animals whose owners genuinely couldn't otherwise afford necessary care. Ashworth proposes this year, and you say yes in the hospital parking lot before either of you can properly plan anything. You testify before a veterinary licensing board this year, advocating for standards you believe genuinely matter for animal welfare. You keep a small file of thank you notes from residents you've mentored over the years, rereading them during difficult weeks. The low-cost clinic program eventually gets replicated by 3 other regional hospitals, a legacy outlasting your own tenure there. You keep photographs of every resident you formally trained, a growing collection documenting careers you helped shape. Ashworth attends every single award ceremony you're ever nominated for, sitting quietly with visible pride each time. You reflect often on that 18-year-old student who genuinely had no idea what awaited her across this entire career. Level 10. Today. You are 38 years old, and the hospital runs with a rhythm you helped build across 2 decades of accumulated dedicated work. Voss visits occasionally, watching you manage the hospital with an expression that still communicates more than her words ever fully could. Marchetti is thriving at her own hospital now, and you two still compare difficult cases occasionally, comparing notes across different institutions entirely. Ashworth picks you up after particularly difficult days without needing to be asked anymore. A routine built quietly across years together. If any single rank in this journey genuinely resonated with you, tell us which one down in the comments. We read every single one. You think sometimes about that first terrified clinical rotation, hands clumsy over a nervous golden retriever whose owner watched skeptically. You think more often about Biscuit, understanding that some losses simply become part of what shapes you permanently, rather than fading with distance. Somewhere in your hospital tonight, a new resident is standing uncertainly near the surgical suite exactly like you once did. Overwhelmed by responsibility she doesn't yet fully understand. You recognize exactly what that moment means, because you were exactly that person once, a long time before you understood what this profession would actually cost, and what it would actually give back in return. Your wedding, small and quiet, includes half the hospital staff in attendance regardless of formal invitations sent. Marchetti gives a short toast that leaves you both laughing and quietly emotional simultaneously. You keep a small photograph of Biscuit tucked inside your desk drawer, a private reminder that started everything you eventually became. Voss attends the wedding too, standing near the back exactly as she once did during your veterinary school talk. The cycle continues exactly as it always has, exactly as Voss once explained it would, decades before you understood. Standing in your hospital tonight, decades collapse strangely into a single, continuous, deeply meaningful thread of purpose. You never forget that first nervous golden retriever, the patient who taught you everything genuinely mattered. Some mornings you still half expect a difficult case to walk through the door, old instincts never fully fading. The cycle continues forever, exactly as it always has throughout veterinary medicine's history, exactly as it always inevitably will.